It was a crisp, late afternoon in New York City. Donald Trump was sitting in the back of his sleek black SUV, the hum of the engine echoing softly in the quiet of the car. He had just finished a long meeting with his business partners and was heading home when something unusual caught his attention. Driving through one of the city's poorer neighborhoods, Trump's gaze fell on a family. A mother, father, and 3 children sat huddled together on the cold, cracked pavement at a busy intersection. The father held a tattered cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." The mother's eyes were tired, and the children looked confused, their small bodies wrapped in dirty blankets. It was a stark contrast to the polished skyscrapers and luxury cars around them. Trump slowed the car, his eyes narrowing slightly. He wasn't sure what had drawn his attention. Maybe it was the hopelessness in their eyes or the harshness of their circumstances. Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the hustle of the city around him fading away as he stared at the scene before him. "Stop the car," Trump said, his voice firm, yet filled with something unrecognizable. The driver, taken by surprise, immediately pulled over to the side of the road. Trump opened the door and stepped out into the chilly air. He was used to attention, his name, his reputation, always in the spotlight. But today, as he approached the family, it wasn't the cameras that mattered. It wasn't the public opinion or the business deals waiting for him back home. It was something deeper, a pull in his gut that told him this was important. The father looked up as Trump walked over, his eyes wary but hopeful. "Can I help you?" the father asked, his voice hoarse from the cold. Trump paused for a moment, sizing up the man. He was tall, perhaps in his late 30s, with unshaven cheeks and eyes that told a story of exhaustion. His clothes were ragged, and his shoes were worn down to their soles. "Yeah," Trump replied, glancing at the children, who were nervously clutching their mother. "What happened? How did you end up here?" The man hesitated, looking over at his wife, who was holding one of the children close. "We lost our apartment a few months ago," the father said quietly. "Fire took everything. My job, I lost that too. And since then, it's been a struggle to survive. We've been on the streets for a while now." Trump felt a pang in his chest. He wasn't sure why this situation was affecting him so much, but it was. These were real people, not just faces in the crowd. He had seen homeless people on the streets before, but this family felt different. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Trump asked, his voice gentler now. The mother shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, we don't. We've been trying to get into a shelter, but it's always full." Trump stood there for a moment, lost in thought. He had made billions, built a brand, and led a country. But here, in front of him, was something that none of his power or wealth could solve in an instant. There was no press release, no PR spin to fix this. It was just a man, a woman, and their children, caught in a web of misfortune. "Come with me," Trump said, after a moment of hesitation. "I'm going to help you." The family looked at him in disbelief, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But Trump's voice was calm, assuring. They had nothing left to lose, and maybe, just maybe, this man was offering a lifeline. "Get in the car," Trump said again, motioning toward his vehicle. "I'll take you somewhere safe." What would you do in Trump's place? Would you take a moment to help someone who needs it, or would you just keep driving? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. To truly understand why Trump stopped that day, we need to take a step back and look at his past, his upbringing, his rise to fame, and the motivations that guided his decisions. Donald Trump, the name that resonated in boardrooms, political rallies, and headlines, was not always the public figure many knew. Born and raised in Queens, New York, he came from a family that was successful but not always wealthy by today's standards. Donald's father, Fred Trump, was a real estate developer who built affordable housing across New York City. Growing up in the bustling streets of Queens, Donald learned early on that nothing came easy. His father was strict, demanding, and often showed little emotion. Yet, Donald admired his father's business acumen. It wasn't the warmth that Fred gave, but rather the lessons on ambition, success, and hard work that shaped him into the man he became. From a young age, Donald had a drive to succeed that was almost unmatched. He attended the New York Military Academy, a decision his father made to instill discipline. It was there that Donald honed his competitive nature and learned to lead. By the time he graduated, he was determined to carve out his own path, one that didn't rely solely on his family's wealth. After attending the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, Trump entered the real estate world. He quickly gained a reputation as a shrewd businessman with an eye for profitable deals. He built the Trump Tower in Manhattan, an iconic landmark that solidified his place in the business world. Over time, he expanded his empire to include hotels, casinos, and golf courses around the world. But as much as Trump built his fortune, he wasn't immune to the pressures and complexities of life. His relationships, both personal and professional, were often turbulent. Despite his success, he had faced his share of challenges. His first two marriages had ended in divorce, and his public persona often created a divide between him and those around him. Still, Trump never wavered in his belief that success was a reflection of one's hard work, determination, and resilience. In public, he was often seen as a businessman, a reality TV star, and eventually a political figure. His larger-than-life personality and bold statements made him a polarizing figure. But underneath the bravado, there was something more. Beneath his tough exterior, Donald Trump had always kept a desire to be more than just a businessman or celebrity. He wanted to be seen as someone who made an impact, someone who could shape history. In the years following his presidency, Trump's name was both revered and reviled. But when it came to this homeless family on the streets of New York, he wasn't thinking about his public image. He wasn't thinking about politics or the press. For the first time in a long while, he was simply thinking about what was right in front of him, a family in need. The decision to stop and offer help wasn't just about charity. It was about more than money or fame. It was about showing compassion in a way that transcended all the noise of the outside world. And maybe, just maybe, it was about finding something meaningful for himself in the process. As Trump gestured toward his SUV, the family hesitated. They exchanged wary glances, unsure of what to do. The mother, holding the smallest child close to her chest, looked up at the billionaire standing before them. His stature alone, the sharp-cut suit, and the powerful aura he carried were enough to make anyone feel small. Yet, something about his presence seemed different today. It wasn't the usual air of authority or dominance. Instead, there was a hint of sincerity, something that hadn't been seen much in his public persona. "Is this for real?" the father asked, his voice low and cautious. "You're offering us a ride?" Trump nodded without hesitation. "Yes. I'm offering you a chance to get off the street. You deserve better than this." The father swallowed hard, fighting back a lump in his throat. His family had been struggling for so long that even the thought of someone offering genuine help felt almost surreal. "We've been trying to get into shelters," the mother said softly, "but every time they're full. No one's ever really stopped to help." Trump's expression softened. "I'm stopping now. Get in." The family slowly stood up, still uncertain. But the children, who had been quietly observing, now seemed eager to move. They grabbed onto their mother's hands, their little faces filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. As the father guided his family to the vehicle, Trump held the door open for them. "Don't worry," he said reassuringly. "I've got a place for you. Just trust me." The family climbed in one by one, unsure what to expect. Trump settled into the seat across from them, his demeanor calm but thoughtful. As the car pulled back onto the street, the sounds of the city seemed to fade, and the inside of the vehicle was filled with an unusual silence. The family, still in shock, couldn't quite believe what had just happened. For Donald Trump, this moment was unlike any other. He had faced storms in the boardroom, political battles, and had fought hard for his place at the top. But now, sitting in the back of the car, he felt a sense of responsibility that went beyond anything he had ever experienced. He wasn't just a businessman in this moment. He was a man trying to do something good, trying to make a difference in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. "Where are we going?" the father asked, his voice breaking the silence. "You'll see," Trump replied with a small smile. "But I promise you'll be safe." The ride felt long, and yet, in that strange sense of uncertainty, the family started to feel something they hadn't felt in months: relief. They hadn't dared to believe that help could come from someone like Trump, But there was a strange comfort in the fact that, for once, someone was offering a solution without expecting anything in return. As the car drove through the city, the neon lights reflecting off the windows, the mother watched the children, their tired faces starting to show small glimmers of hope. They had all but given up on the idea of safety, of a place where they could sleep without the fear of being evicted or chased away. But now, as they sat in the back of a luxury vehicle with a man who had more power and wealth than they could comprehend, they had a sliver of hope. After what seemed like an eternity, Trump finally spoke again. "You'll be taken care of. I know a place where people like you can get back on your feet. I've seen it work, but you've got to give it a shot." The father nodded, looking at his wife with a sense of gratitude. He wasn't sure what Trump's plan was, but he didn't care. For the first time in a long while, he felt like there might be a chance for his family to start over. As the car pulled into a quieter part of the city, the tension seemed to lift slightly. The unfamiliar, comforting silence of the vehicle made it feel as though time had stopped, just long enough to give this family the chance they so desperately needed. The car pulled to a stop in front of an unassuming building nestled between two towering structures. It wasn't much to look at, but there was something about it that felt different from the cold, indifferent world outside. The building had a warmth to it, literally and figuratively. It wasn't a luxury hotel or a mansion. It was a place designed to help people. A shelter, but not the kind the family had encountered before. Trump stepped out first, followed by the father, then the mother with her children in tow. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the sidewalk as they walked up to the entrance. Trump pressed a buzzer, and a voice crackled through the intercom. "Yes? It's me," Trump said simply. "I have a family here that needs help. Open the door." After a brief pause, the door clicked open. A middle-aged woman in a green uniform stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of surprise and curiosity at seeing the former president standing there with a family that looked like they'd been living on the streets for months. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice a little unsure. "I didn't expect you to." "Neither did I," Trump interrupted with a small smile. "But this family needs a place to stay. They're going to be safe here, right?" The woman nodded. "Of course. We've got rooms, and we can make arrangements for them. We've seen families like this before." "Good," Trump said, his tone firm but with a hint of satisfaction. He turned to the family. "You're going to be okay now. I'm leaving you in good hands." The father, who had been silently absorbing everything, stepped forward. "Mr. Trump, we don't know how to thank you. You've given us a chance. Something we didn't think we'd ever have again." Trump waved it off. "No need for thanks. Just take the opportunity. Work hard. I don't give handouts, but I give chances. Make the most of it." The mother, still in disbelief, glanced down at her children, who were now looking around with wide eyes. The boy, about 7 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, do you think we'll be able to stay here for a long time?" She smiled at him, her eyes filling with tears. "I hope so, sweetheart. I really do." Trump didn't wait for more. He gave them one last nod and turned to walk back to the car. As he opened the door, he glanced back at the family one last time. They stood there, unsure but grateful, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, they looked hopeful. The SUV slowly pulled away, and the family entered the building, where a volunteer was waiting to show them to their new rooms. Inside the shelter, the family was greeted warmly. The volunteer, a kind-hearted woman named Linda, showed them to their room, a small, yet clean space with 2 twin beds, a desk, and a window that overlooked a quiet street. For the first time in months, they would have a safe place to sleep. As Linda explained the rules of the shelter, curfew times, the process of signing up for meal plans, and the support services available, they began to relax. The children eagerly jumped onto the beds, their small faces lighting up as they felt the soft, clean sheets. The parents, still processing everything that had happened, sat quietly on the bed, taking it all in. "Mr. Trump didn't have to do this," the father said, his voice full of gratitude. "I never thought someone like him would care about people like us." Linda smiled gently. "It's not just about money or power," she said softly. "Sometimes, it's about seeing the humanity in others and helping when you can. What you do with this opportunity now is up to you, but we'll be here to support you every step of the way." The mother nodded, wiping away a tear. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered. As they unpacked the few belongings they had left, mostly clothing and small personal items, the family began to settle in. The children, once anxious and scared, now giggled as they explored their new room. The mother and father sat together, quietly talking about what they would do next. They knew their road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew they had a chance. Outside, the night sky was dark, and the city was alive with its usual hum. But inside that humble shelter, a family who had lost everything was finally beginning to find hope again. And as the sound of the children's laughter filled the small room, it seemed as if a new chapter was beginning for them. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the horizon, the family awoke in the shelter. It felt like a dream. For the first time in what seemed like forever, they slept through the night without worrying about where they'd wake up or if they'd be safe. The children were the first to get up, excitedly jumping out of bed and looking out the window. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had in months. The mother stood up slowly, a sense of peace settling over her. She glanced at her husband, who was still sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out at the view of the city. "Can you believe it?" she whispered, almost to herself. He turned to her, eyes tired but soft. "No, I don't think I can." But even as they began to take in their new surroundings, there was still an underlying question that neither of them could shake. Why did Donald Trump, of all people, help them? There were countless families in need, but it was their family he chose to step in for. Was it a publicity stunt? Or had something about their situation truly resonated with him? They couldn't answer that yet, but for the first time in a long time, they were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were changing for the better. After breakfast, Linda, the shelter volunteer, stopped by to check on them. She smiled warmly as she knocked on the door. "Good morning, everyone. How did you sleep?" "Better than we have in months," the mother responded with a grateful smile. The kids were already eating cereal at the small table, talking and laughing, their energy filling the room. For once, the atmosphere was light, and it felt like a normal day. "That's great to hear," Linda said, sitting down with them. "I'm glad you're settling in. Now, I have a little surprise for you." "Surprise?" The father raised an eyebrow. He was curious but cautious. After everything they had been through, it felt almost unbelievable that surprises could still be good. "Yes," Linda continued. "Mr. Trump asked me to bring some people to visit you today. He wanted to make sure you're well taken care of and that you have the resources you need to start fresh." The father's face softened with disbelief. He wants to see us again?" "Not exactly," Linda said, "but he sent a few people from his foundation to meet with you, help you with anything you might need. They'll be here soon." The mother exchanged a glance with her husband. "That's unexpected, isn't it?" "It is," the father said quietly, "but maybe it's a good thing." The rest of the morning was filled with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. The shelter was small, but the impact of the visit made the space feel larger, somehow. The kids, still in their pajamas, sat by the window, excitedly watching for the visitors to arrive. The parents sat together, discussing what they might need and how they would handle the future, but it was clear that they both had one thing on their minds. Why? Why would someone like Trump go out of his way for them? By noon, there was a knock on the door. Linda opened it, and in walked two sharply dressed men, each carrying a briefcase. They looked out of place in the humble shelter, with their expensive suits and polished shoes, but they moved with a sense of purpose. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Martinez," one of them said, offering a firm handshake. "I'm John, and this is Mark. We're here from the Trump Foundation. Mr. Trump sent us to make sure you have what you need to get back on your feet." The father stood up, shaking both of their hands, still in disbelief. This is unbelievable." "Not at all," John replied. "Mr. Trump believes in giving people the tools to succeed, not just charity. We're here to help you make a plan, whether that's finding a job, getting into school, or simply getting the resources you need to rebuild your life. We've helped families in your situation before, and we're confident we can help you too." Mark, the second man, opened his briefcase and pulled out a series of documents. "Here's what we've set up for you," he continued. "We've arranged for you to get financial counseling, job placement assistance, and even medical care if you need it. You'll also be enrolled in a local training program to help you develop new skills. The family exchanged glances, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. The father was the first to speak. "You really think we can turn things around?" John nodded. "We do. You've got everything in front of you. Now it's just about taking the first steps. Mr. Trump is a believer in second chances, and he's offering you one. It's up to you how you use it." Tears welled up in the mother's eyes. We don't know how to thank you." Mark smiled warmly. "You don't need to. Just use the opportunity. That's enough for us." As the two men continued outlining their plans for the family, the father felt a sense of hope growing inside him. For the first time in a long time, he could see a path forward, a path that didn't involve just surviving, but actually thriving. This was more than just a handout. This was a lifeline, and it came when they least expected it. After the meeting, the family sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had just happened. Their lives had been turned upside down in the best possible way. They were no longer just surviving on the streets. They were about to embark on a new journey, one filled with promise and opportunity. The days following the visit from the Trump Foundation representatives passed quickly, but the family could hardly keep up with the whirlwind of new opportunities that had opened up to them. For the first time in a long time, they felt like their future was in their hands, instead of being dictated by circumstances they couldn't control. The father, Alejandro, had never been one to ask for help. In fact, it was one of the reasons they had ended up on the streets in the first place. His pride had kept him from reaching out when they were in desperate need. But now, as he sat at the small table in the shelter, filling out job applications and discussing job training programs with the foundation staff, he began to realize that sometimes asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength. Maria, the mother, spent her days taking care of the children, making sure they were enrolled in local schools and participating in the shelter's child development programs. She had always dreamed of a better life for her kids, but the reality of their situation had dimmed those hopes. Now, though, she could feel the weight of her dreams coming back to life. Her children's laughter in the shelter, their excitement about their new school, filled her with a warmth she hadn't felt in so long. And then there was Trump. He hadn't been a part of their lives in the traditional sense. He hadn't walked them through the shelters or handed them a job personally. But his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He wasn't just offering them a handout. He was offering them a chance to stand on their own 2 feet. And that was something that could change everything. One morning, as Alejandro was heading out for his first day at a job interview, he felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. It was a small construction company, but it was a start. He had worked in construction before, but it had been years. The skills were still there, but his confidence was not. Maria stood by the door, watching him adjust his jacket. "You'll do great," she said softly, her voice full of quiet encouragement. "This is your chance." Alejandro smiled, though the nervousness in his eyes was hard to hide. "I hope so. I really do." As he left the shelter and made his way to the interview, he couldn't help but think about how far they had come in such a short amount of time. Less than 2 weeks ago, they were on the streets, with nothing but their clothes and each other. And now, he was on his way to a job interview, with resources, support, and, most importantly, a renewed sense of hope. At the same time, Maria was taking the kids to their new school, walking with them hand in hand as they chattered excitedly about the day ahead. Her mind was buzzing with thoughts of the future. She had always wanted to become a nurse, but life had gotten in the way. Now, she was looking into enrolling in a local healthcare training program. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to fight for it. A few hours later, Alejandro returned to the shelter with a small grin on his face. Maria was just finishing up some paperwork when she saw him walk through the door. "How'd it go?" she asked, her voice filled with anticipation. "I got the job," Alejandro said, his voice still in shock. "I can start next week." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. "You did it. We did it." Alejandro pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart swelling with emotion. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he was truly in control of his life again. This was only the beginning, but it felt like a major victory. The road ahead was still long, but the first step had been taken. That evening, as they sat together at dinner, Maria looked at their children with pride. "We've got a long way to go," she said, "but we're finally moving in the right direction." The kids, who had been quiet for most of the meal, looked up at their parents. "We're going to be okay, right?" the youngest, Sophia, asked, her wide eyes filled with hope. Maria smiled, her heart full. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be better than we've ever been." The next few days brought even more changes. Maria enrolled in the healthcare training program, and although it was overwhelming at times, she felt a renewed sense of purpose every time she walked into class. She studied hard, staying up late to finish assignments and learn new concepts. The foundation had set up a tutor to help her with her studies, and they even provided her with a stipend to cover some of the costs. Meanwhile, Alejandro settled into his new job at the construction company. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, and it allowed him to start saving money for the first time in years. He was learning new skills and reconnecting with old ones, and with each passing day, he felt more confident. The work was hard, but every dollar he earned meant more security for his family. As they moved through their days, they began to see just how much had changed. They weren't just getting by anymore. They were thriving. They had a plan, they had support, and most importantly, they had hope. Their future was no longer uncertain. And though they would never forget the moment when Donald Trump had offered them that first lifeline, they also realized that it was their own strength, their determination, and their love for each other that would carry them through. Trump had given them the chance to succeed, but it was up to them to make it happen. As they sat together that night, talking about their plans for the future, one thing became clear. They were ready for whatever came next. Weeks passed since Alejandro started his new job, and the family slowly began to adjust to their new routine. The change in their lives was almost surreal. They had gone from being homeless and struggling to survive on the streets to living in a safe shelter with the promise of a brighter future. But even with all the positive changes, the family was still grappling with the emotional weight of their past. For Alejandro, the hardest part was adjusting to his new sense of responsibility. In his past, he had been the provider, the man who took pride in keeping his family fed and safe. Now, he was stepping into a new role, one where he was no longer just surviving, but thriving. The job at the construction company was just the beginning, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of pressure to succeed. Maria, too, felt the weight of expectations. Her classes at the healthcare training program were challenging, but she was determined to finish. She knew that if she could complete the program, she could open new doors for herself and her children. But balancing her studies, family responsibilities, and the emotional toll of their past was no small task. The children, however, had adapted with a sense of ease that surprised both parents. They were thriving in their new school, making friends, and becoming more confident every day. Sophia, their youngest, had always been quiet and reserved, but now she was the first to jump into games and activities with her new classmates. Their son, Mateo, had always been the more outgoing one, and he quickly became popular among his peers, sharing stories of his family's journey. He proudly told his friends about his father's new job and how his mother was learning to become a nurse. The change wasn't just limited to the family. The ripple effect of their transformation was felt throughout the shelter and even in the local community. The staff at the shelter had witnessed countless families come and go, but Alejandro and Maria's story was different. It wasn't just about receiving help, it was about the determination to build a future. Other families began to take notice, seeing in the Martinez family a model of perseverance and hope. One afternoon, as Alejandro finished a long day at work and returned to the shelter, he was approached by Linda, the volunteer who had first greeted them when they arrived. She had a warm smile on her face, but there was something in her eyes that made Alejandro pause. "Hi, Alejandro. I was wondering if you had a moment to talk," she said. "Sure, Linda. What's going on?" Alejandro asked, concerned. "I've been talking to some of the other families here," she began, sitting down on the bench next to him, "and they've been inspired by your family's progress. You've really set an example for everyone." Alejandro was taken aback. "I didn't realize anyone was paying attention. We're just trying to make it work, you know?" Linda nodded. "I know, but sometimes, just seeing someone make it through all the hardships can give others the strength to keep going." There's a family that's been here for a while, the Reyes family. They're really struggling to get back on their feet, but seeing how you've handled everything has given them new hope. They're thinking about enrolling their kids in the same school your children go to, and they're talking about looking for work. Alejandro felt a sense of pride swell inside him. I had no idea our story was making an impact. We're just doing what we can. You're doing more than that, Linda said, her voice filled with admiration. You're showing people that change is possible. You're proving that there is a way out, no matter how hard things get. Later that evening, as Alejandro sat down with Maria, he shared the conversation he had with Linda. You know, it's strange. I never thought anyone would look at us and think of us as an example. Maria smiled, taking his hand. I think we've all been so focused on just getting by that we've forgotten how far we've come. We've made it through the hardest parts. And now, it feels like it's not just about us anymore. We're part of something bigger. Alejandro nodded. Yeah, it's like a ripple effect. If we can do it, maybe others can too. The next morning, Maria received a call from the local community center, where she had been attending classes for her nursing program. The program director was on the line, and she had some exciting news. Maria, we've been really impressed with your progress. We want to offer you a scholarship to continue your education. It will cover your tuition for the next year, and will also provide you with a stipend to help with your living expenses while you finish the program. Maria's heart raced. It felt like everything she had worked for was finally paying off. She had poured so much effort into her studies, and now, she could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The scholarship would give her the chance to finish the program without the constant worry of how to pay for it. I don't know what to say, Maria said, overwhelmed. Thank you. This means everything. The director laughed. You've earned it. Just keep up the hard work. You're doing great. As the weeks passed, the Martinez family continued to grow stronger. Alejandro's job was going well, and he was already earning enough to start looking for a permanent apartment for his family. Maria's scholarship provided her with the financial stability she needed to focus on her studies without the added stress of living paycheck to paycheck. And the children? They were thriving in their new environment, with friends, extracurricular activities, and a sense of security they had never known before. It was no longer just about surviving, it was about building. The Martinez family was laying the foundation for a future they could be proud of. As the months passed, life continued to improve for the Martinez family. Alejandro had settled into his job at the construction company, while Maria made significant progress in her healthcare training. The children were excelling in school, and every day, the family felt more hopeful about their future. They had transformed from a family struggling to survive to one with dreams of a better life. But they weren't the only ones who were changing. The shelter, once a place of temporary refuge, had become a community. Other families, inspired by the Martinez family's journey, began to follow in their footsteps. Linda, the volunteer who had first welcomed them, worked tirelessly to connect families with resources, job training programs, and educational opportunities. She often spoke of the Martinez family as an example of what was possible when you didn't give up. One day, Linda called Alejandro at work. Alejandro, I need you to come by the shelter after your shift today. There's something important I want to discuss. Sure, Linda, he replied, a little curious, but also a bit cautious. What's going on? I can't tell you over the phone, but I think you'll want to hear it in person, Linda said, before ending the call. After a long day at work, Alejandro made his way to the shelter, his mind racing with possibilities. What could Linda need from him? He had gotten used to the idea of giving back, but he wasn't sure what more he could offer. When he arrived, Linda was waiting for him in the community room, which was filled with families who had gathered for an informal meeting. Come in, Alejandro, she called, waving him over. We've been talking about you and your family, and we have an idea. Something we want to start. Alejandro raised an eyebrow as he walked into the room, where several families were sitting. He recognized the Reyes family, who had been inspired by the Martinez family story, and a few other familiar faces from the shelter. There was a sense of excitement in the air, and Alejandro could tell something big was coming. Okay, Alejandro said. What's all this about? Linda smiled warmly. We've been thinking about how much your family has grown since you first arrived here. And how many other families have seen that growth and felt inspired by it? We want to do something that will help all of us, not just to survive, but to thrive. And we thought it might be time to start a support group. Alejandro's eyes widened. A support group? For families like us? Exactly, Linda said, nodding. We want to create a space where families who are rebuilding their lives can come together, share their struggles and victories, and help each other along the way. A community, really? It's not just about surviving anymore. It's about thriving together. The room erupted with applause, and several people stood up to shake Alejandro's hand. He could see how much this meant to them, how much hope it had given them. The idea of building a community that wasn't just about shelter, but about support, encouragement, and shared success had a powerful impact. I don't know what to say, Alejandro said, his voice thick with emotion. I never imagined that our story could lead to something like this. Maria, who had joined him in the meeting, smiled proudly. I think we've all learned that we're stronger together. If we can help one another, we can build something that lasts. Linda beamed. Exactly. It's not just about finding a place to live. It's about finding a place to belong. The idea of a support group quickly gained momentum. Families who had once been strangers to one another began to connect, sharing their experiences, offering advice, and providing a much-needed sense of camaraderie. They all came from different backgrounds, but they had one thing in common. They were rebuilding their lives from the ground up. Alejandro and Maria became pillars of this new community. Their story served as a beacon of hope for those who were still struggling to see a way out of their difficult situations. But they didn't just inspire, they also contributed. Alejandro, with his experience in construction, began offering workshops for other men in the group, teaching basic skills that could help them secure work. Maria, with her nursing training, offered advice on healthcare, helped with job applications, and even shared tips on balancing work and family life. As the weeks turned into months, the group became a true support system. It wasn't just about finding jobs or getting an education. It was about emotional and mental support. There were nights of laughter, tears, and celebration. The children played together, and the adults bonded over shared experiences. One evening, as the group gathered to discuss their progress, Alejandro stood up to address the crowd. He had never been one to speak in front of large groups, but he felt that this was different. These people weren't strangers. They were his community. I just want to say thank you, Alejandro began, his voice a little shaky at first. When we first arrived here, I had no idea what to expect. We were lost. But now, seeing all of us here together, I realized something. This is what it's all about. It's not just about getting back on your feet. It's about lifting each other up. When we work together, we all rise. There was a moment of silence as everyone took in his words, and then the room erupted in applause. It was clear that they had all come a long way, individually and as a community. As the year came to a close, the Martinez family reflected on how far they had come. Alejandro had a steady job, Maria was well on her way to becoming a nurse, and the children were thriving in school. But more than anything, they had built a strong, supportive community that would continue to help them through the challenges ahead. One of the most important lessons they had learned was that no one has to face adversity alone. Through the support of others, they had not only rebuilt their own lives, but had helped others do the same. And in that process, they had found something far more precious than material wealth, a sense of belonging, hope, and the strength that comes from being part of a community. The Martinez family had settled into their new routine. Alejandro's construction job was going well, Maria was making strides in her nursing program, and their children were flourishing in their school environment. For the first time in a long while, they had begun to feel a sense of stability. They were no longer the family living in a shelter, struggling to survive. They were now part of a community, working toward a future they had once thought unattainable. One quiet Saturday afternoon, as the family sat down for lunch in their modest but cozy apartment, the doorbell rang. Alejandro stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans as he made his way to the door. When he opened it, his jaw nearly dropped. Standing on the other side of the door was none other than Donald Trump. "Mr. Trump?" Alejandro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump smiled and extended his hand. "Alejandro, it's good to see you again. How have you been?" For a moment, Alejandro was speechless. He had never expected to see the former president again, let alone at his doorstep. His mind raced with questions, but all he could manage to say was, What are you doing here?" Trump chuckled and stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. "I was in town and thought I'd check in on how you and your family were doing. You've made quite an impression on a lot of people, Alejandro. I wanted to see for myself how you're all doing." Maria, who had been in the kitchen preparing lunch, walked into the living room, startled by the unexpected guest. When she saw who it was, her eyes widened, and she stopped in her tracks. "Mr. Trump?" she stammered, clearly shocked. "Maria, right?" Trump said with a warm smile. "I heard you're doing well in your nursing program. That's fantastic." Yes, thank you," Maria replied, still in disbelief. "But why? Why are you here?" Trump looked around the apartment and nodded approvingly. "I've heard a lot about you and your family, about how you've managed to turn your lives around. It's impressive. You've done what many thought was impossible. You've inspired a lot of people, including myself." Alejandro and Maria exchanged a glance, both still processing the unexpected visit. "I've been in touch with Linda from the shelter," Trump continued, "and she told me about all the good work you've been doing for the other families. You're not just looking out for yourselves, you're helping others. That's something worth recognizing." The room fell into a stunned silence. The idea that someone as high-profile as Donald Trump was taking time out of his day to visit them was almost too surreal to believe. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," Alejandro said, still a bit overwhelmed. "We're just trying to do what we can. It's been a tough journey, but we're finally getting back on our feet." Trump nodded. "I understand. I know what it's like to face challenges. But what you've done isn't just about personal success. It's about giving back. You've created a ripple effect. The work you've done in that community is something that's going to keep growing." Maria looked at her husband, her eyes filled with pride. They had both worked so hard to get to this point, but to hear someone like Trump acknowledge their efforts meant more than words could express. "I wanted to do something for you," Trump said, breaking the silence. "You've shown true resilience and commitment, and I believe that should be rewarded." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you, Alejandro and Maria." Alejandro took the envelope, still in shock. He opened it carefully, his hands shaking slightly. Inside, there was a check, a sizable one. Alejandro's heart raced as he looked at the number printed on it. "This is to help you get your family on solid ground," Trump explained. "I want to make sure that you have the resources to continue moving forward and building your future. This is an investment in your success." Alejandro stared at the check, his mind whirling. "Mr. Trump, this is too much. We didn't ask for anything like this." Trump waved his hand dismissively. "You don't have to ask. Sometimes, the right thing to do is just to help. You've earned it." Maria, her voice full of emotion, spoke up. "We're so grateful for this. But it's not just the money. It's the belief in us, in what we're doing. That means everything." Trump smiled. "It's not just about money, Maria. It's about making sure people like you have the chance to succeed. You've proven that if you put in the work, you can achieve anything." Alejandro nodded, still processing the magnitude of the moment. "Thank you. Thank you both. We won't forget this." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they all sat down for lunch. Trump was surprisingly personable, asking about the children and their schoolwork, chatting about the changes in the community, and offering advice on life and business. It was clear that, while he was a larger-than-life figure with a powerful presence, there was a genuine side to him that came through during their conversation. Before leaving, Trump stood up and shook Alejandro's hand once more. "Keep doing what you're doing. You're making a difference." As the door closed behind him, Alejandro and Maria looked at each other, still in disbelief. It felt like a dream, one they hadn't dared to dream. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Alejandro and Maria sat together, reflecting on the unexpected visit. "This is crazy," Alejandro said. "I never thought we'd be in a position where we're getting a check from someone like him. But I think what really hit me is that he believes in us." Maria nodded. "It's not just the money. It's that we're on the right path. We're doing something good, and people are noticing." Alejandro smiled, his heart full of gratitude. We've come a long way. And now, it's time to make sure we don't stop. The surprise visit from Donald Trump had a profound impact on the Martinez family. What began as a simple gesture of support snowballed into something much greater than they had ever anticipated. The generous check that Trump had left behind didn't just help pay off some bills or put food on the table. It gave them the opportunity to expand their horizons and continue to make a difference in their community. In the days that followed, the family found themselves reflecting deeply on their journey. The financial gift was undeniably helpful, but it was the recognition of their efforts that had moved them the most. They had gone from living in a shelter, struggling to survive, to becoming role models for others. The knowledge that they had inspired people, including someone as influential as Donald Trump, fueled their drive to keep pushing forward. Maria, in particular, felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was in the final stages of her nursing program, and with the extra financial support, she could now focus entirely on her studies without the stress of wondering how to pay for the next semester. The weight of her past struggles, the long hours spent balancing work, school, and caring for her family, felt a little lighter now. But Maria wasn't the only one feeling the weight of this newfound purpose. Alejandro's construction work was progressing, but it was his community involvement that truly began to take shape. The families at the shelter, those who had once been in the same situation as the Martinez family, looked to them for advice. Alejandro didn't hesitate to offer his help, drawing from his own experiences to mentor others who were trying to get their lives back on track. He'd learned that the key wasn't just working hard. It was working smart and with a sense of community. Alejandro knew that his journey wasn't just about securing a job for himself. It was about lifting others up along the way. One evening, as Alejandro was preparing for his weekly community meeting at the shelter, Maria came into the living room holding a letter. "Who's it from?" Alejandro asked, curious. Maria glanced at the envelope before handing it to him. "It's from Linda." Alejandro opened the letter and began to read aloud. "Dear Alejandro and Maria, I want to personally thank you both for everything you've done for our shelter families. Your story has inspired more people than you'll ever know. We've been seeing a real shift in the community since you joined us. Families are beginning to support each other in ways we never thought possible. Your efforts have made a lasting impact. But I'm writing because I've received some incredible news. A local foundation has heard about the work you've been doing, and they want to support you even further. They're offering a grant to help fund the next phase of your community outreach program. They believe in the work you're doing, and so do I. Let's meet soon to discuss this opportunity. With gratitude, Linda." Alejandro's hands shook slightly as he finished reading. A grant? A local foundation wanted to support their work? Maria leaned over his shoulder, equally in awe. "This is incredible, Alejandro. It's all happening so fast. I can't believe it," Alejandro murmured. This is what we've been working toward all this time. It's not just about us anymore. It's about all the families we've helped, the lives we've touched." Maria nodded, her eyes filled with pride. "We've been given a chance, Alejandro, and now we have to make the most of it." The next week, Alejandro and Maria met with Linda at the shelter to discuss the grant. When they walked into the meeting room, they were greeted by representatives from the local foundation, a couple of business owners who had heard about the Martinez family's efforts and wanted to help. The room was filled with excitement, and as Linda outlined the specifics of the grant, Alejandro and Maria felt the weight of the responsibility they had taken on. "This is more than just a financial opportunity," Linda said. "This is a chance to take everything you've built here and bring it to a larger scale. Imagine what you could do if you had the resources to help even more families. The foundation believes in you, and so do I." Alejandro felt a lump form in his throat. He glanced at Maria, who gave him a reassuring smile. They had worked so hard to get to this point, but now they were being asked to take everything to the next level. "We're ready," Alejandro said, his voice filled with conviction. "We've been given so much, and we want to make sure we give back on a bigger scale. We want to help more families, just like we were helped." The representatives from the foundation nodded, smiling. "We believe in you. Let's get started." Over the next several months, Alejandro and Maria worked tirelessly to build their community outreach program. The grant allowed them to hire additional staff, expand their efforts, and create more resources for families in need. They offered workshops on job training, financial literacy, parenting, and personal development. They connected families with mentors, provided educational resources, and even began to offer temporary housing assistance to those who were most vulnerable. As the program grew, so did their reputation. People from other communities, inspired by what the Martinez family had accomplished, began to reach out for advice and support. Alejandro and Maria had become symbols of hope, not just for their family, but for anyone who had ever felt lost or overlooked. The ripple effect of their work was spreading, and the impact was undeniable. One evening, Alejandro sat with Maria in their living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. Their apartment, though modest, felt like a home now. The chaos of their early days had given way to a quiet sense of peace, one that they had worked hard to create. "You know, Maria," Alejandro said, "I never imagined this. I thought we'd just survive, but we've built something. Something that's bigger than us." And it all started with that moment, when Trump showed up at our door. Maria smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's not just about that moment. It's about everything that came after. The support, the community, the people we've helped. That's the real gift." Alejandro kissed the top of her head. "You're right. It's not about what we've received. It's about what we've been able to give." The Martinez family had come a long way from their days in the shelter. They had gone from receiving help to giving it, creating a ripple effect that spread throughout the community. And as they continued their work, they knew one thing for certain. The journey was far from over. There were still so many people to reach, so many lives to touch. But with each step they took, they knew they were making a difference, one person, one family, at a time. The Martinez family was no longer living day to day, struggling to survive. They had reached a point where they could breathe, think, and plan for a better future. But with their newfound stability and success came challenges they hadn't anticipated. Challenges that tested not just their resilience, but their ability to navigate the rapidly changing circumstances they found themselves in. The first challenge came in the form of managing the rapidly expanding community outreach program. Alejandro and Maria were passionate about the work they were doing, but the pressure was mounting. They were juggling their full-time jobs, their roles in the program, and their responsibilities as parents. It was becoming harder to maintain a balance. Maria, with her nursing program nearing its completion, found herself staying up late to study while simultaneously managing the day-to-day operations of the program. She was often exhausted, and there were days when she felt like she was on the verge of burnout. Meanwhile, Alejandro was faced with the task of organizing volunteers and handling the logistics of the program, which was growing faster than they could have ever imagined. The shelter was becoming more than just a place for temporary relief. It was becoming a center for community transformation. Alejandro felt the weight of this responsibility every day. Despite their efforts, the couple began to notice a strain in their relationship. They had always been a team, relying on each other to get through their toughest times. But now, with the added pressures, it seemed as though they were growing distant, disconnected by the overwhelming demands of their lives. One evening, after another long day of work, Alejandro sat down on the couch, exhausted. Maria was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and the house was quiet, save for the occasional clink of utensils. "I feel like we're drowning, Maria," Alejandro said, his voice heavy with frustration. Maria stopped in her tracks and turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how much longer we can keep up with all of this," Alejandro replied, rubbing his temples. "The program, the kids, my job, your studies. We're stretched too thin, and I feel like we're barely keeping our heads above water." Maria's face softened, but she could see the truth in his words. She had been feeling it too. The pressure, the exhaustion, the feeling that they were constantly running on empty. "We're doing a lot, Alejandro, but maybe we need to slow down, figure out a way to take a step back," Maria suggested, her voice calm but filled with concern. Alejandro looked at her, his eyes filled with doubt. "We can't. People are depending on us now. We can't let them down." Maria walked over to him, sitting beside him on the couch. "I know, but what good are we to anyone if we burn out? We need to take care of ourselves, too. We've come so far, but we can't keep running at this pace forever." Alejandro sat silently, pondering her words. She was right. They couldn't keep sacrificing everything for the program and expect to come out unscathed. Something had to change. The next day, Alejandro and Maria made a decision. They needed to reevaluate their priorities and bring in help. They couldn't continue doing everything on their own, no matter how much they wanted to. They reached out to trusted friends and volunteers from the community to help lighten the load. One of the first things they did was hire a program coordinator, someone who could help organize the growing number of volunteers and manage the day-to-day operations of the community outreach program. It was a tough decision to make, but they knew it was necessary. They could no longer be the only ones holding everything together. In the weeks that followed, the changes they made began to show results. The program continued to thrive, but now they were able to focus on their family and their individual goals as well. Maria finished her nursing program with flying colors, and Alejandro was able to take on fewer hours at his construction job to spend more time with their children and on the program. The most important change, however, was the one that took place between Alejandro and Maria. By acknowledging the strain on their relationship and working together to address it, they found a renewed sense of closeness and understanding. They were partners, not just in the work they were doing, but in every aspect of their lives. One night, as they sat down for dinner with their children, Alejandro looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most in the world. He saw the pride in his children's eyes, the quiet satisfaction in Maria's smile, and the warmth that filled their home. "We've come a long way," Alejandro said softly, raising his glass to his family. Maria smiled, her hand resting gently on his. "We have, but we still have a long way to go." Alejandro nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle in his chest. For the first time in a while, he wasn't worried about what the future held. They had faced their challenges, and they had learned that sometimes growth wasn't just about moving forward. It was about knowing when to take a step back. As the months passed, the Martinez family continued to thrive. They were not only helping others, but also taking care of themselves and each other. The outreach program grew, and the community that had once seemed like a distant dream was now a living, breathing reality. And while the challenges they faced were still there, they no longer seemed insurmountable. With each new hurdle, they had the confidence to rise above it, knowing that they had the support of their community and, most importantly, the strength of their family. The Martinez family had come a long way. Their story was no longer one of survival, but of thriving and giving back to the community. The outreach program was growing. Maria had graduated from nursing school, and Alejandro had more time to dedicate to his passion of helping others. Life had become a beautiful whirlwind of activity, but something was about to change that would shift their perspective once again. It began with an unexpected phone call. Alejandro was at the construction site, checking in on a project when his phone buzzed. He looked at the number. It was from Linda, the woman who had helped them get started with the outreach program. "Hey Linda, what's going on?" Alejandro answered, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Hi Alejandro, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," Linda said, her voice unusually serious. "I've got something important I need to discuss with you and Maria." Alejandro's curiosity piqued. "What's it about?" "There's been an opportunity that has come up. A pretty big one. I think you and Maria are the right people to take this on. But I need you both to hear me out before we get too far into it." "Okay, we'll be home in a few hours. Can we meet tonight?" Alejandro asked, his mind racing. "That sounds good. I'll meet you both at your place," Linda replied, and the line went quiet. That evening, Linda arrived at their apartment, a stack of papers in hand. Alejandro and Maria greeted her, but there was an air of uncertainty hanging between them. "Everything okay?" Maria asked, her eyes narrowing in concern. Linda gave a small smile, but then motioned to the table where the papers were spread. "There's an opportunity for the outreach program to scale up in a major way. A large donor wants to fund the program, but there's a catch." Maria and Alejandro exchanged a glance. They had worked so hard to get to where they were, and now the thought of scaling up was both exciting and terrifying. "What's the catch?" Alejandro asked, his voice steady but cautious. "Before the donor agrees, they want to see a concrete plan for how the program will impact the community on a larger scale," Linda explained. "They're willing to give you a substantial amount of money to expand your efforts, but they need to know you can handle the growth. We're talking about a full partnership with their company, and it could bring national recognition. Alejandro and Maria sat in stunned silence, processing the gravity of the situation. It felt like the moment they had been waiting for, but it also felt daunting. Could they really take their program to a national level? Could they handle the responsibility? Later that night, after Linda had left, Alejandro and Maria sat together in the living room, the weight of the decision settling in. The glow of the lamp illuminated their tired faces, the silence between them deep and reflective. "Maria, what do you think?" "This is huge," Alejandro said, leaning back on the couch, his hands resting behind his head. Maria took a deep breath, her eyes filled with both excitement and trepidation. "I think we've come so far, Alejandro. We've built something that people believe in. Maybe it's time we really push it to the next level." She paused, looking at him, waiting for his response. "But what if we fail?" Alejandro asked quietly. "What if it's too much for us to handle?" Maria took his hand. "We won't know unless we try. We've always taken risks before, and look where it's gotten us. We have each other, and we have a team that's been supporting us from the start. It's not going to be easy, but we can do this together." Alejandro nodded slowly, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. Maria was right. They had faced challenges before, and they had come out stronger. This was just another challenge, one that had the potential to take everything they had worked for to a whole new level. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and planning. Alejandro and Maria worked tirelessly with Linda, refining their vision for the program's expansion. They crafted a detailed plan outlining how the outreach program could grow, how it could impact other communities, and how they would manage the influx of resources and volunteers. At first, the idea of scaling up felt overwhelming. The prospect of managing a national initiative seemed beyond their reach. But with Linda's guidance and the support of their core team, they began to see the possibility of their dreams becoming a reality. Then, just as they were finalizing their plan, the donor finally responded. "It's a go," Linda said, her voice brimming with excitement as she called them one afternoon. "They're on board. They want to fund you, Alejandro and Maria. This is happening." The news was surreal. Alejandro and Maria sat in stunned silence, allowing the magnitude of the moment to sink in. They had worked so hard, given so much, and now they had the chance to take it all to the next level. The following months were a whirlwind. The program grew exponentially, reaching more families and communities than Alejandro and Maria had ever thought possible. With the funding from the donor, they were able to hire more staff, offer more resources, and expand their outreach to more cities. The national recognition followed soon after, and with it came a new set of challenges. Managing a larger team, overseeing the financials, and ensuring the program's core values remained intact were just a few of the hurdles they faced. But with every new obstacle came a renewed sense of purpose. One day, after a long meeting with potential partners and sponsors, Alejandro sat in his office and thought about how far they had come. He thought back to that first day when Trump had shown up at their door, offering support when they had nothing. That moment had sparked everything, had changed the course of their lives. Maria walked into the room, smiling as she saw him lost in thought. "You okay?" she asked, sitting down beside him. Alejandro looked at her and smiled. "Yeah, I was just thinking about how everything changed that day, and how much we've accomplished. I can't believe it." Maria took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We've come so far, haven't we?" Alejandro nodded. "We have, and we're just getting started." With the national recognition and expansion of their program, the Martinez family had created something lasting, a legacy of hope and change. They had taken risks, faced challenges, and built something bigger than they had ever imagined. And now, as they looked ahead, they knew their journey was far from over. They had learned that no matter how daunting the future seemed, as long as they had each other, anything was possible. As the Martinez family's outreach program grew, so did the complexities of their lives. What had started as a humble project aimed at helping a few families in need had transformed into a thriving, nationally recognized initiative. Alejandro and Maria had long ago made peace with the fact that their lives were no longer normal in the way they once knew it. But now, they were facing something they hadn't expected. The tipping point where everything they had worked for seemed to hang in the balance. The program's success had drawn the attention of powerful figures, business leaders, media moguls, and even government officials. While this attention brought financial support and increased visibility, it also created pressure. The more successful they became, the more people wanted a piece of the pie. New partners arrived with offers of collaboration, but each deal came with strings attached. What began as a noble mission to serve the community now felt like a business. One particularly stressful day, Alejandro found himself sitting in his office, staring at a pile of proposals. He was already late for a meeting with a potential corporate sponsor, but the weight of the decisions on his shoulders made it impossible to leave. The phone rang, snapping him from his thoughts. "Hello?" Alejandro answered, trying to mask the weariness in his voice. "Alejandro, it's Linda," came her familiar voice. "I think we need to talk." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "What's going on, Linda?" "I've been hearing a lot of concerns from the team," Linda continued. "People are starting to feel like the program is losing its focus. It's becoming too corporate, too much about the money, and not enough about the families we're trying to help." Alejandro's heart sank. He knew Linda was right. As they expanded and took on more partnerships, the personal touch had begun to slip away. The program was no longer just about the families in need. It was now a machine that had to be fed. "I've been feeling the same way," Alejandro admitted. "It's like we've gotten so big, we've lost sight of why we started all of this in the first place." Linda paused. "Maybe it's time to step back and refocus. What's the point of growing if it means we lose our soul in the process?" That night, Alejandro and Maria sat down to discuss everything. The realization had settled in that they had reached a crossroads. The outreach program had brought them success, yes, but it had also brought challenges they hadn't expected. "The last thing I want is for our program to become a business venture," Alejandro said, his voice laced with frustration. "It's supposed to be about helping people, about giving them a chance, not about chasing profit or making deals with people who don't understand what it's all about." Maria nodded, her hand resting on his. "I feel the same way. But we can't just walk away from everything we've worked for either. We've made promises to people. There are families depending on us." Alejandro leaned forward, his face filled with determination. "We need to find a way to keep the heart of the program intact. We can't let it become something it wasn't meant to be. Let's talk to the team and figure out what we can do." The following week, Alejandro and Maria called an emergency meeting with the team. Linda, along with other key members of the program, gathered around the table. The air was thick with tension as everyone waited for Alejandro to speak. "We need to be honest with each other," Alejandro began, looking around the room. "We've grown, and that's a good thing. But in growing, we've lost sight of our original mission. We've become too focused on the financial side of things, and that's not why we started this." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So, here's the question. How do we balance growth with our core values? How do we keep our mission pure, while also allowing the program to expand and reach more people?" Maria spoke up next, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've been given an opportunity to change the world, but we can't lose sight of why we started this in the first place. We wanted to make a difference. We wanted to help families like ours. And that's not going to change, no matter how big we get." There was silence in the room as everyone absorbed what they had said. It was clear that the team was feeling the same sense of unease. No one wanted the program to become just another corporate entity. They all wanted it to remain grounded in the values that had made it successful in the first place. Finally, Linda spoke up. "We have to make a choice. We can either continue down this path and let the program become something it was never meant to be, or we can take a step back, reevaluate, and find a way to grow without compromising our values." Alejandro stood up, looking around the room with renewed resolve. "I think it's time we do just that. We've come this far because we've stayed true to ourselves. Let's not lose that." In the weeks that followed, the Martinez family made significant changes to the program. They decided to take a more selective approach to partnerships, only working with organizations and companies that shared their core values. They reduced their reliance on large corporate donations, instead focusing on community fundraising and grassroots efforts. They also introduced more stringent guidelines to ensure that the families they helped were always at the center of their efforts. With these changes in place, the program regained its focus, and the team felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Martinez family learned a valuable lesson in balancing growth with integrity. They realized that success wasn't just about reaching more people. It was about staying true to their mission and keeping the heart of their work intact. One evening, as Alejandro sat on the porch with Maria, looking out over the city they had worked so hard to build a better future in, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had come to understand that the journey was just as important as the destination. It was about the people they helped, the families they had touched, and the love and dedication they had put into everything they did. "We're doing the right thing," Alejandro said softly, taking Maria's hand. She smiled, squeezing his hand in return. "We always have been." Months passed, and the Martinez family's outreach program continued to flourish. With the recent changes they made, the balance between growth and integrity became a guiding principle for their decisions. Yet, as the program expanded, so did the challenges. The pressure was ever present, and new obstacles seemed to arise daily. One morning, as Alejandro sat at his desk going over budgets and scheduling, the phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but it had become a habit to answer every call that might relate to the program. "Hello, Alejandro Martinez speaking." "Mr. Martinez, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," a calm, but slightly tense voice replied. It was a man, with a refined tone. "My name is Thomas Barlow, and I represent a large philanthropic group. I've heard a great deal about your work." Alejandro sat up straighter, already sensing the seriousness in the call. "I'm glad to hear that. How can I help you?" "Your outreach program has truly made waves. We're impressed by how much you've accomplished. However, there are some concerns that we need to address if you're interested in continuing to receive support." Alejandro's stomach tightened. The name Thomas Barlow didn't mean anything to him, but it didn't take long to understand that the man was a key player in one of the largest foundations in the country. He was someone whose opinion mattered in the world they now operated in. "Concerns?" Alejandro asked, cautiously. Barlow's voice turned more direct. "Yes, the scale of your program has impressed us, but we have reason to believe that the money we've donated in the past isn't being used as efficiently as it should be. We've conducted some independent audits, and we've found discrepancies in the financial records." Alejandro felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "Discrepancies?" he repeated, trying to steady his breath. "What exactly are you referring to?" "I'm afraid I can't go into specifics right now, Mr. Martinez," Barlow replied, his tone now a little sharper. "But unless these issues are addressed promptly, we will have to reconsider our support." The line went quiet for a long moment. Alejandro's mind raced. He knew the program had always tried to maintain transparency, but they were working with more funds than ever. It was possible that somewhere, in the scramble to meet the growing demands, mistakes had been made. But would the foundation pull its support based on rumors or minor mistakes? He couldn't afford to lose their backing, not when they were on the verge of impacting so many more lives. "I understand, Mr. Barlow," Alejandro said, trying to mask the anxiety in his voice. "I will investigate the matter right away and make sure any issues are cleared up." Barlow's tone softened slightly. "Good. We expect your full cooperation, Alejandro. This is a test. Prove that your program is as trustworthy as it seems, and you'll have our continued support. Fail, and we'll have to reconsider our future with you." With that, the call ended, leaving Alejandro staring at the phone in disbelief. That afternoon, Alejandro sat down with Maria, explaining the conversation he had just had. The weight of the situation was heavy on them both. They had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it felt like everything was at risk. They couldn't afford any missteps. "I don't understand," Maria said, pacing back and forth. "We've always done everything by the book. How could this be happening?" "I don't know," Alejandro replied, running a hand through his hair. "But we have to get to the bottom of it. This is bigger than just us now. If the foundation pulls out, we lose everything." Maria stopped in her tracks, looking him in the eyes. "Then we'll fix it. We've faced bigger challenges before." The next few days were a blur of audits, meetings with financial advisors, and late-night discussions with the team. Alejandro knew that if there was even the slightest issue, it would need to be resolved quickly. He worked tirelessly, reviewing every transaction, every receipt, every line in the financial reports. Maria was by his side the entire time, providing support, keeping the morale of the team high. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they found it. A small but significant accounting error. A few donations had been misallocated due to a software glitch. It wasn't malicious, but it was enough to raise red flags for the foundation's auditors. The mistake was fixed immediately, and an updated financial report was sent over to Thomas Barlow's team. A few days later, Alejandro received another call from Thomas Barlow. "Mr. Martinez," Barlow said without preamble, "I've reviewed the updated report, and I must say, I'm satisfied with your response. The issue appears to be a simple error, and I appreciate your prompt action in addressing it." Alejandro felt a surge of relief. "Thank you, Mr. Barlow. I want to assure you that we take full responsibility for any oversight, and we're committed to maintaining transparency going forward." "I'm glad to hear that," Barlow replied, his tone more relaxed now. "You've passed this test, Alejandro. Your program remains one of the most impressive we've seen. We'll continue to support you. But remember, you're always under scrutiny at this level. Don't let this be a lesson you have to learn twice." With that, the call ended. As Alejandro sat back in his chair, a deep breath escaped him. It was over, at least for now. But the experience had shaken him. He had realized how vulnerable they were, no matter how much progress they made. It wasn't just about doing the work. It was about maintaining trust, transparency, and accountability. That evening, Alejandro and Maria sat together on their porch, reflecting on what had just happened. "We've learned a hard lesson today," Alejandro said, his voice thoughtful. "We can't just focus on growing. We need to focus on staying true to our values, always." Maria nodded. "We've been through so much to get here. We can't afford to lose sight of what matters." The breeze was gentle as they sat together, the stars twinkling above them. For the first time in days, Alejandro felt a sense of peace. They had faced a test, and they had passed. But the true test, he realized, was not in the numbers or the deals. It was in staying grounded, no matter how far they went. The pressure from the foundation's scrutiny had subsided, but Alejandro and Maria both knew that their work wasn't over. With the financial mishap behind them, they were more determined than ever to focus on what truly mattered: the families they served. But as the program grew, so did the demands on their time, and a new challenge loomed on the horizon. It had been a few weeks since the issue with the philanthropic foundation had been resolved, and the Martinez family had worked hard to regain their momentum. Alejandro had felt like he was constantly racing from one meeting to the next. Maria, too, was stretched thin, overseeing new community projects, and yet, there were still moments when they both felt overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table after a long day of work, Maria sighed deeply, staring at the paperwork in front of her. "Alejandro, I think we need help," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Alejandro looked up, his brow furrowed. "Help? You mean with the program?" She nodded. "Yes. We can't keep doing everything ourselves. We need to find a way to support our team, and more importantly, we need to support each other." Alejandro thought about it for a moment. She was right. The work they were doing was important, but it was also taking a toll. The program had become more than just an outreach initiative. It was now a lifeline for so many families, and the responsibility that came with that was enormous. "I know," Alejandro said, rubbing his temples, "but who can we trust? We can't afford to hire just anyone." Maria smiled wearily. "What about someone who has been with us from the beginning? Someone who understands what we're trying to do and who shares our values?" Alejandro's eyes widened as he realized who she was talking about. "Linda." "Yes," Maria said, her eyes lighting up with relief. "Linda has been an invaluable part of this program since the start. She knows the ins and outs. If anyone can help us manage this growing project, it's her." Alejandro nodded, his heart feeling lighter at the thought. They had always known Linda was a key part of their success. She had been there through thick and thin, and her unwavering dedication had earned her their trust. It was time to give her more responsibility. The next day, Alejandro called Linda into his office. As she walked in, her usual upbeat demeanor was tempered by a subtle concern. She could tell that something was different in the air. "Hey, Linda," Alejandro said, motioning for her to take a seat. "We need to talk." Linda sat down, folding her hands in front of her. "Is everything okay? I heard some rumors about the foundation's involvement." "We're good now," Alejandro interrupted, offering her a reassuring smile. "But we need to talk about the future of the program. It's growing so fast, and Maria and I can't keep up with everything." Linda nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "You don't have to do it alone, Alejandro." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about," he said, leaning forward. "We want you to take on a more significant role, help us manage the program's day-to-day operations. You know what we're trying to do here, and you know how important it is. Would you be willing to step into a leadership role?" Linda's eyes widened with surprise. "You want me to lead the program?" Alejandro smiled. "I do. You've been with us since the beginning, and I can't think of anyone more suited for the job. You know the families we serve, and you know how important it is that we stay true to our mission. We need someone who can keep everything running smoothly, but also who can make sure we never lose sight of why we're doing this." Linda looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm honored, Alejandro. I've always believed in what we're doing. But it's a big responsibility." Alejandro leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "I know it is, but I trust you, Linda, and I think you're the right person for the job." There was a long pause as Linda considered the offer. Finally, she looked up and nodded. "I'll do it. I won't let you down." Alejandro's heart swelled with gratitude. "I know you won't. Thank you." Over the next few weeks, Linda stepped into her new role with grace and confidence. She began by organizing the program's operations, streamlining processes, and ensuring that the right resources were allocated to the families who needed them most. With her leadership, Alejandro and Maria were able to take a step back from the daily grind and focus on the broader vision for the future. Linda's leadership was exactly what the program needed. She not only helped to alleviate the pressure on Alejandro and Maria, but she also brought fresh ideas and new energy to the table. Her ability to empathize with the families they served made her an excellent bridge between the executive team and the community. She understood the emotional weight of their work, and she never lost sight of the human aspect of it. With Linda at the helm of the day-to-day operations, Alejandro and Maria were able to focus on expanding the program's outreach and solidifying new partnerships with local businesses. They had long been passionate about creating sustainable solutions for the families they served, and now they had the space to pursue that vision with renewed vigor. One evening, after a successful event where local businesses had committed to supporting the program, Alejandro and Maria sat down on their porch again, reflecting on how far they had come. "I think we're finally getting this right," Alejandro said, his voice filled with gratitude. Maria leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "We couldn't have done it without Linda. She's become an extension of our family." Alejandro nodded. "She's not just an employee. She's part of our team, part of our mission. We're all in this together." As they sat in the quiet of the evening, looking out over the city, Alejandro realized that the program's success wasn't just about the resources, the partnerships, or the growth. It was about the people who stood by them. Linda, the volunteers, the businesses, and most importantly, the families they served were all part of the story. And in that moment, Alejandro knew that the future of their work, the success of their mission, rested not in their own hands alone, but in the hands of all those who believed in the cause. Have you ever had to ask for help when you felt overwhelmed? How did it feel to trust someone with more responsibility? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, even the strongest leaders need a helping hand sometimes, and it's okay to lean on those you trust. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the Martinez family found their rhythm. The outreach program was growing stronger with every passing day, and more people in the community were benefiting from the work they did. Linda was proving to be an invaluable asset, and Alejandro and Maria could finally take a step back, trusting their team to handle the day-to-day operations. The strain they had once felt was slowly lifting. But just as they started to feel a sense of stability, the unexpected happened. It was a Thursday morning when Alejandro received a call that would change everything. "Mr. Martinez," the voice on the other end of the line said. "This is Kelly Thornton from the Rosewood Foundation. We've been following your outreach program, and we are incredibly impressed with the impact you've made. I'd like to discuss an opportunity for us to partner with you." Alejandro's heart skipped a beat. The Rosewood Foundation was one of the most well-respected philanthropic organizations in the country. They were known for their significant contributions to community development and their strategic partnerships with grassroots organizations. If they were interested in working with the Martinez family, it could be a game-changer. "Of course, Mrs. Thornton. I'd love to hear more about what you have in mind," Alejandro said, trying to keep his excitement in check. After a brief conversation, they scheduled a meeting for the following week. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Alejandro spent the next few days going over every aspect of the program, fine-tuning their goals, and preparing for the most important meeting of his life. The day of the meeting arrived, and Alejandro, Maria, and Linda gathered at their office, dressed in their best outfits, ready to make their case. They knew the stakes were high, and they were determined to put their best foot forward. The Rosewood Foundation was a big deal, and this could be the break they needed to take their program to the next level. When Kelly Thornton walked into their office, she exuded confidence and warmth. She was a woman in her early 40s, with short auburn hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She immediately offered her hand to Alejandro, then to Maria and Linda, her smile genuine. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you all," Kelly said as they all sat down. "I've been following your work, and I must say, I'm thoroughly impressed. Your impact on the community is undeniable, and the way you've grown this program in such a short time is remarkable." Alejandro could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had expected this meeting to be much more formal, but Kelly was already on their side. "We appreciate your kind words, Kelly," Maria said, "but we're here because we truly believe in what we're doing. We've always wanted to make a lasting impact in this community, and we know that the work we do will change lives." "I can see that," Kelly replied, "and that's why I'm here today." The Rosewood Foundation is looking to expand its partnerships with organizations that share our vision, and from what I've seen, you are exactly the kind of group we want to work with. The room fell silent for a moment as Alejandro, Maria, and Linda exchanged glances. This was the moment they had been working toward. They had been so focused on keeping the program running, they hadn't dared to dream too big. But now, it seemed like everything was within reach. Kelly continued, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "We're prepared to offer a significant grant to support the expansion of your program. The foundation believes that with our financial backing, you could increase your outreach exponentially, helping even more families and individuals. But in return, we need to know that we can trust you. Trust that you will continue to prioritize the community and not lose sight of your mission." Alejandro felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was everything they had worked for, but it also felt like a heavy responsibility. The future of their program was no longer just in their hands. It was in the hands of a much larger force. "We understand the responsibility that comes with such a gift," Alejandro said, his voice steady but full of conviction. "We've always been transparent with our operations, and we are committed to continuing that. This grant will allow us to do even more for the people who need us most. We won't let you down." Kelly smiled, nodding approvingly. "I'm confident that you won't. We've done our research, and everything about your organization aligns perfectly with our goals. We want to move forward with this partnership." A few weeks later, the formal announcement came. The Rosewood Foundation had officially partnered with the Martinez family's outreach program. The grant would allow them to hire more staff, expand their facilities, and, most importantly, serve more families in need. It was the breakthrough they had been hoping for, but it also came with its own set of challenges. With the influx of new resources, Alejandro and Maria knew they had to maintain their commitment to their original mission. They couldn't let the money and prestige change who they were or why they started this work in the first place. They had to remain true to their values. That night, as the family sat together, celebrating the news, Alejandro raised a glass. "To the Rosewood Foundation," he said, "and to the families we serve. May we always stay grounded in the mission we set out to accomplish." Maria smiled warmly, her hand on his. "To the future." But just as they were beginning to celebrate their success, another unexpected twist awaited them. The very next day, Alejandro received a call from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, Alejandro," the voice said, sounding almost sheepish. "It's Jason. Jason Price. I don't know if you remember me." Alejandro was momentarily stunned. Jason had been a close friend during his early years, but they had lost touch when Alejandro focused all his energy on building the outreach program. "Of course, Jason. It's been a long time. How are you?" Jason's voice dropped a little, as if unsure how to continue. "I'm doing okay. But, Alejandro, I need your help. It's my brother. He's fallen on hard times, and I don't know where else to turn." Alejandro's heart sank. He had been through so many emotional situations in recent months, but this felt different. Jason was a real friend, and now he was reaching out, unsure of what the next step should be. "What happened?" Alejandro asked gently. Jason paused. "It's complicated, but he's homeless, Alejandro. He's on the streets, and I can't get through to him. I don't know what to do." Alejandro stood up, pacing. He knew that the work they were doing had never been about just numbers or programs. It was about real people. And now, one of his own, someone he had once called a close friend, was asking for help. "I'll help," Alejandro said, his voice firm. "Let's figure this out." The request for help from Jason hit Alejandro hard. He had dedicated so much of his life to building the outreach program and helping others, but now the tables had turned. His friend needed him. As much as he wanted to believe they were on top of everything, this situation felt different. Jason wasn't just a stranger asking for help. He was someone Alejandro had once shared laughter, struggles, and dreams with. The urgency in Jason's voice made him realize that no matter how successful the program had become, there were always personal stories that would need his attention. That night, after their conversation, Alejandro couldn't sleep. Maria could sense the unease in him as he tossed and turned. "Alejandro, what's going on?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. He sat up in bed, running a hand through his hair. "Jason called today. It's his brother. He's on the streets, Maria. I don't even know how it happened or what went wrong. He's in a tough place, and I don't know if I can help him the way I helped others." Maria sat up, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. "You've always been able to help, Alejandro. Maybe this is just different, but that doesn't mean you can't be there for him." Alejandro shook his head. "It's not that simple. When we started this, I never thought I'd be helping someone I knew personally. I've always been able to maintain boundaries, but with Jason, it feels like a whole different ballgame. I'm scared I won't be able to help him the way he needs." Maria reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "No one ever said helping others was easy. But you've always been a fighter, a problem solver. You've made a difference in so many lives. Maybe now, it's time to take the lessons you've learned and apply them in a way that's more personal." Alejandro looked into Maria's eyes, finding reassurance in her calm presence. She was right. The program had given him the skills, tools, and determination to help countless people, and this situation, as personal as it was, didn't change that. "Okay," Alejandro finally said, a sense of resolve washing over him. "I'll reach out to Jason tomorrow. We'll figure this out together." The next day, Alejandro drove to the place where Jason had told him his brother, Matt, was staying. It was a part of the city Alejandro had driven by many times, but never really paid attention to. Now, as he approached the area, it felt different. His chest tightened, and a deep sense of uncertainty settled within him. Jason had given him an address that led to an old shelter. When Alejandro arrived, he saw a group of men and women huddled outside, talking quietly, some of them smoking, others just staring off into space. It was a far cry from the polished world of philanthropic meetings he was used to. This was raw, unfiltered reality. Jason met him outside. His face was drawn, and his eyes showed the weariness of someone who had been fighting for far too long. "Alejandro," Jason said, his voice shaky. I didn't know who else to call. You're the only one who I think can help. I don't know what to do anymore." Alejandro gave his friend a tight hug. "I'm here. We'll get through this." They walked inside the shelter, and Alejandro's heart sank when he saw Matt. He was sitting in a corner, his hair unkempt, his clothes ragged. He looked like a different person, the spark that once lit up his eyes gone. Matt looked up when he heard Alejandro's voice, but there was no recognition, no joy at seeing a familiar face. Just a blank stare. "Matt?" Alejandro said gently, kneeling down in front of him. "It's me, Alejandro. I came to help." Matt blinked, his eyes still clouded with confusion. "Alejandro? You're really here?" Alejandro smiled softly. "Of course I am. You're not alone in this." Matt looked at him, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition. But then he shook his head, as though trying to clear the fog from his thoughts. "I don't know if anyone can help me anymore. I'm too far gone." Jason, who had been standing by nervously, stepped forward. "Matt, please listen to him. He's here to help. You don't have to do this alone." Alejandro placed a hand on Matt's shoulder, his voice steady but filled with empathy. "You don't have to do this alone, Matt. Whatever it takes, we're going to work through this together. I promise you." For the first time in a long while, a small tear trickled down Matt's cheek. Alejandro felt a pang of sadness in his chest. He understood, now more than ever, that recovery wasn't a one-time fix. It was a long, challenging journey, but it was one that could be faced with support, understanding, and the willingness to never give up on someone. The following weeks were a blur of hospital visits, therapy sessions, and long nights spent talking to Matt about his past, his struggles, and his dreams. The road ahead was uncertain, and the work required was monumental. But Alejandro had learned that the same principles he applied to his outreach program could be applied to helping Matt. One step at a time, one day at a time. As the weeks went by, Matt began to show signs of improvement. He was still fragile, still fighting demons he had long buried, but he was starting to fight. For the first time in a long time, he was willing to accept help, and that made all the difference. One evening, after a particularly difficult therapy session, Matt sat with Alejandro in a small cafe near the shelter. The air was cool, and the hum of conversations filled the space. "Why are you doing this for me?" Matt asked, looking at his brother and Alejandro. Alejandro smiled softly. "Because you're family, Matt. And no matter where you've been or what you've been through, you're never alone. We'll always be here for you." Matt looked away, trying to hide the tears in his eyes. "I don't deserve this. I've done so much wrong." "Everyone deserves a chance to change," Alejandro replied. "And you're taking it. That's what matters. No matter how long it takes." Weeks turned into months, and while Matt's journey to recovery was far from over, there was hope. Through the support of his family, the outreach program, and his own inner strength, Matt was slowly finding his way back. And through it all, Alejandro learned something he would never forget. The mission he had started was never just about helping strangers. It was about being there for the people who mattered most. And sometimes, that meant stepping into the personal pain and struggles of those closest to you. As the months went by, the outreach program continued to thrive, and the Martinez family found a sense of balance. Alejandro's decision to help Matt had been difficult, but it brought with it a sense of clarity. He realized that the work he did with the program wasn't just about giving others a chance. It was about offering second chances, not just to strangers, but to people he loved and cared about. Matt's recovery was slow, but it was steady. He was attending therapy regularly, starting to rebuild relationships with family members, and working toward a job at a local auto repair shop. For the first time in a long while, there was light in his eyes. Alejandro saw glimpses of the brother he once knew, strong, resilient, and full of life. Still, recovery was not a linear process. There were setbacks, days when Matt would regress, fall back into old habits, and question whether he could ever truly change. During those moments, Alejandro was there, standing by him, ready to remind him that healing was a journey, not a destination. "Some days are better than others, huh?" Alejandro said to Matt one afternoon as they worked together on the yard of the shelter. Matt nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, I'm not used to this. It feels like I'm taking one step forward and two steps back. But I guess I'll keep trying." "That's all any of us can do," Alejandro replied, offering his brother a hand to help him lift the heavy bags of soil. Keep going, even when it's hard. Even when it doesn't seem like you're making progress. You'll get there. Matt looked at Alejandro, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thanks. You're the only one who hasn't given up on me. Alejandro smiled. You're my brother, Matt. I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. Meanwhile, the outreach program had been growing stronger than ever. The partnership with the Rosewood Foundation had opened new doors, and the community was beginning to rally around the cause in ways Alejandro had never imagined. They were helping not just the homeless, but families facing a variety of struggles: job loss, addiction, abuse, and more. People were beginning to believe that change was possible, that it wasn't too late to turn their lives around. Linda, who had become an indispensable member of the team, was putting together a mentorship program. She believed that one of the key ways to help people was by connecting them with others who had walked similar paths, those who had overcome their own obstacles and could offer guidance and hope. We need to give people role models, Linda said during one of their meetings. We need to show them that recovery is possible, that they don't have to face everything alone. Alejandro agreed wholeheartedly. The best way to inspire someone is to show them that change isn't just something that happens to other people. It can happen to them too. Maria, who had become the heart of the program, was focused on helping families rebuild their sense of stability. She organized weekly support groups where parents could share their struggles, celebrate their successes, and find strength in each other. The group became a tight-knit community of support that helped many families avoid the same traps that had once brought them to their lowest points. But despite all the successes, there was always the looming question. Could they keep it all going? Alejandro knew that as the program grew, so did the responsibility. The stakes were higher now, and the pressure was beginning to take its toll on him. One evening, after a long day of meetings and community events, Alejandro sat in his office, staring out the window. The city was quiet, the lights from the streetlights casting a gentle glow over the buildings. Maria walked in, holding a cup of coffee. She could tell something was on his mind. "You've been quiet all night," she said, sitting down beside him. "What's going on?" Alejandro sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, Maria. I feel like everything is moving so fast. We've been doing well, but what if we can't keep up? What if the pressure is too much?" Maria placed her hand on his, her touch soft and reassuring. "Alejandro, we're not alone in this. We have each other. We have Linda. We have the whole community. And we have the Rosewood Foundation backing us. You don't have to carry all this on your own." "I know," he said, his voice tinged with doubt. "But I've always been the one to make decisions. What if I make the wrong one? What if all this falls apart?" Maria leaned in closer, her voice steady and warm. "You've made it this far because of your heart, your dedication, and the people who believe in you. You're not doing this alone, and you never have been. Don't let the weight of everything overwhelm you." Alejandro let out a deep breath, the tension in his body slowly easing. Maria was right. He had come this far not because of his own strength, but because of the strength of those around him. The community, the program, the people who believed in him. They were all part of something much larger than just himself. And that gave him the courage to keep going. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Maria smiled, squeezing his hand. "You'll never have to find out." The next day, Alejandro made a decision. He reached out to the Rosewood Foundation, asking for their guidance and support. He needed to find a way to continue growing the program while ensuring that the quality of care and personal attention was never lost. The foundation was eager to help, offering resources, additional funding, and mentorship for the leadership team. With their support, Alejandro felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the challenges ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready. This journey wasn't just about helping others. It was about helping himself, too. It was about accepting that even he needed support, that even he could benefit from second chances. As the outreach program continued to grow, so did the stories of transformation. Families who had once been on the brink of despair were now thriving. People who had been on the streets for years were now employed, working toward their dreams and rebuilding their lives. And through it all, the Martinez family remained the foundation. the driving force behind the hope and change that had started in their own home. And Matt? He continued his recovery, taking it one day at a time. Though the road was long, there were moments when he, too, could see the light ahead. For the first time in years, he had a vision of a future he was finally willing to fight for. As the days turned into weeks, Alejandro found himself reflecting more on his journey. It wasn't just the outreach program that had transformed, it was his entire life. The people he helped, the families he supported, and the challenges he faced had all become intertwined in ways he never expected. But more than anything, it was the love and support of those closest to him, his family, friends, and colleagues, that gave him the strength to keep going. One particularly sunny afternoon, as Alejandro sat in his office reviewing some new proposals, Maria walked in, holding a letter in her hand. There was an excited gleam in her eyes. "Good news?" Alejandro asked, looking up from his desk. Maria grinned and handed him the letter. "You won't believe it. The Rosewood Foundation just approved our request for more funding. They're willing to increase their support for the program, and they're also providing us with a dedicated space for more families." Alejandro's heart skipped a beat. "That's amazing." He stood up and hugged Maria tightly. "This is exactly what we needed. We can reach even more people now." Maria nodded, her voice full of pride. "You've worked so hard for this, Alejandro. You deserve this success." He smiled, but there was a thought that lingered in his mind. This is just the beginning. We need to make sure we don't lose sight of the people we're doing this for. It's not just about growing the program. It's about making sure every family gets the care and attention they need. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll make sure of it. We've always had the heart of the program, and that's what sets us apart." The news of the additional funding and support spread quickly throughout the outreach program. The team was energized, and there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Linda, always the planner, began organizing the logistics for expanding their efforts. With the new funding, they could hire more staff, offer additional services, and create more opportunities for those in need. Alejandro and Maria met with their board members to discuss the next steps. As they sat around the table, their passion for the program and its mission was evident. "We need to focus on sustainability," Alejandro said, addressing the group. "This expansion is great, but we need to ensure that we're not just growing for the sake of growing. We need to make sure that our services are sustainable long-term, and that we're doing right by the families we serve." One of the board members, Susan, spoke up. "I agree. This is an incredible opportunity, Alejandro, but with more families comes more responsibility. We need to make sure we have the infrastructure in place to support them, not just financially but emotionally and physically too." Alejandro nodded thoughtfully. "I'm committed to that. We need to make sure we don't just put people in a space and leave them to fend for themselves. This is about creating a community of support where everyone feels safe, heard, and loved." Over the next few months, the outreach program expanded rapidly. The new funding allowed them to set up a second location, which housed both transitional housing for families and a space for job training, counseling, and other services. The additional support also allowed them to hire case managers who worked closely with each family to help them navigate the complexities of their situations. Matt, now several months into his recovery, had been hired as a mentor in the program. His journey from homelessness to recovery had made him a perfect candidate to support others who were going through similar struggles. He had found his calling, and he was eager to help. "I never thought I'd be in this position," Matt said to Alejandro one afternoon after a mentoring session. "I never imagined I'd be the one giving advice, helping others find their way. But I'm so grateful to be here." Alejandro smiled, placing a hand on Matt's shoulder. "You've earned this. You're proof that change is possible. And you're helping others see that, too." Matt looked down, his eyes filled with emotion. "It feels good, man. Like I'm making a difference. Like I'm finally doing something right." "You are," Alejandro said. "You're showing people that they can overcome anything, no matter how hard the road is." As the program grew, so did the number of families who found new hope through the services it offered. The once vulnerable individuals who had entered the program now stood with confidence, taking the first steps toward rebuilding their lives. Alejandro couldn't help but feel proud of the work they had done, but he knew there was still more to be done. One evening, After another successful day of meetings and family workshops, Alejandro took a walk around the new shelter facility. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink. He stopped near the playground, where children were laughing and playing, their smiles bright against the fading light. He felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just about helping people get back on their feet. It was about giving them a chance to rebuild their lives, to create new memories, and to have the hope they once thought was lost. As he stood there, Maria joined him, her hand slipping into his. "You look deep in thought," she said softly. Alejandro smiled at her, feeling the weight of everything they had accomplished together. "I'm just thinking about how far we've come, how many lives we've touched. I never imagined this would be my life, Maria. I never thought I'd be here, standing with you, looking at all the lives we've changed." Maria leaned against him, looking out at the children playing. "You've made this happen. You've given people the chance to dream again." Alejandro wrapped an arm around her, his heart full. "And they've given me a reason to keep going. Every day, I'm reminded of why we started this. It's not just about helping them. It's about creating a world where people believe in themselves again. A world where hope isn't just a word. It's a reality." As the days turned into months, the outreach program continued to grow, reaching more families, helping more individuals. But Alejandro knew that no matter how big the program became, it would always be about the people they served. The families, the children, the individuals who, at some point, had felt forgotten, abandoned, or lost. In the end, it was their resilience, their courage, and their willingness to change that kept Alejandro and the team moving forward. And as he watched the children play on the playground, he knew that they were just the beginning of the story. With the outreach program in full swing and the families thriving, Alejandro felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never known before. But as with any dream that grows, new challenges began to surface. The program was becoming more successful, but that success brought with it increased responsibility. Alejandro knew he couldn't do it all on his own, no matter how much he wanted to. It was time to prepare for what lay ahead, and that meant facing a new kind of challenge. One morning, Alejandro received a call that would shift his perspective yet again. It was from the city council, and the news was both exciting and daunting. "Mr. Martinez, we've been following the success of your outreach program," the voice on the other end said. "The results you've achieved are incredible. We'd like to discuss the possibility of expanding your services citywide. But there's a catch. If you accept, you'll need to take on a much larger operation. You'll be responsible for coordinating multiple locations, managing a larger budget, and overseeing a broader scope of services. It's going to require a lot of work, but we believe you're the right person for it." Alejandro was stunned. The idea of expanding the program citywide was a dream come true, but it also felt overwhelming. How could he possibly manage such a massive operation? How could he ensure that the same level of care and attention was given to every family, every individual, across a larger area? He hung up the phone, his mind racing. Maria walked into his office, sensing that something was weighing heavily on him. "What's going on?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "The city council called," Alejandro replied, his voice still tinged with disbelief. "They want us to expand. Citywide. More locations, more funding, more people to help. It's a huge opportunity, but I'm not sure I can handle it." Maria placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This is what we've been working for, right? But I understand why you're nervous. It's a lot to take on." Alejandro leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. "I know, but how do we make sure the program doesn't lose its heart? How do I make sure we're not just scaling up for the sake of scaling up?" Maria smiled softly. "That's what makes you different, Alejandro. You've always cared about the people, not just the numbers. You've created something that works because you put the families first. That's not going to change, no matter how big we get." Alejandro met her gaze, feeling the strength of her conviction. She was right. The heart of the program was in the people they served, not the size or scope of the operation. But that didn't make the decision any easier. After taking some time to think, Alejandro called a meeting with his core team, Maria, Linda, and Matt. The decision to expand was not one he could make alone. It would require the collective effort of everyone who had helped build the program from the ground up. As they gathered around the table, Alejandro spoke first. We've been given a huge opportunity. The city wants to help us expand the program citywide. More families, more resources, more locations. It's everything we've dreamed of, but it's also a huge responsibility. Linda nodded thoughtfully. It's exciting, Alejandro, but I understand your hesitation. Expanding means more logistics, more coordination. We need to make sure that we're not just adding locations for the sake of it. We need to be strategic. Matt, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. But we've proven that we can do this. Look at where we started and where we are now. We didn't get here by playing it safe. We got here because we believed in what we were doing and took risks. Alejandro looked around at his team, the people who had been with him every step of the way. He realized that no matter how big the program got, they would face the challenges together. They had always been a team, and they always would be. With that, he made his decision. We're going to do it, Alejandro said, his voice filled with determination. We'll take on the challenge, but we're going to do it carefully, and we're going to keep the heart of this program intact. The families we help will always come first. The decision to expand was made, and the groundwork for the citywide initiative began. The Rosewood Foundation, eager to see the program grow, offered additional support in terms of resources, expertise, and a larger network of partners. The team set to work immediately, outlining a detailed plan to ensure that the expansion didn't compromise the quality of care the program had become known for. As the days passed, Alejandro found himself juggling more and more responsibilities. There were meetings with city officials, partnerships to form, and countless logistics to organize. He felt the weight of it all, but with his team beside him, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Maria, Linda, and Matt each took on expanded roles. Maria worked closely with the new staff members being hired to oversee the new locations, ensuring that they shared the program's core values. Linda took charge of the marketing and outreach efforts, making sure that the community knew about the expansion and could access the new resources. Matt, now an experienced mentor, was tasked with training new mentors who would work directly with the families in each location. The team had grown, but their commitment to the mission remained unwavering. And slowly, the new locations began to take shape. The program expanded into neighborhoods that had long been underserved, offering families in need a chance to build new lives. One evening, as Alejandro stood in the parking lot of the newest location, he felt a sense of awe. The building was modest, but it was full of potential. He could already envision the families who would walk through those doors, seeking the help and support they desperately needed. Maria walked up beside him, a smile on her face. "You did it," she said. "We did it." Alejandro looked around, his heart swelling with pride. "We're just getting started." Have you ever faced a challenge that seemed too big to overcome? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes, the biggest challenges lead to the most rewarding journeys. Together, we can achieve what we never thought possible. As the citywide expansion continued to take shape, Alejandro found himself reflecting on the meaning of family, both the one he had been born into and the one he had created through the outreach program. It had been a long and difficult journey, one filled with sacrifices, heartbreak, and moments of doubt. But now, seeing the lives he had touched, he understood that family wasn't just about blood ties. It was about connection, support, and unconditional love. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden hue across the city, Alejandro sat with Maria on a bench in the new facility's courtyard. The sound of children laughing and playing echoed from the playground nearby. Families were beginning to settle into their new spaces, finding a sense of peace and security that had eluded them for so long. "This is amazing," Maria said, watching the families interact. "We've really built something special here." Alejandro nodded. "We have. But it's not just about the buildings or the programs. It's about the people. Every person who walks through these doors is looking for something more than just a roof over their head. They're looking for a sense of belonging. A family." Maria turned to face him, her eyes full of understanding. "And that's what we've given them. A place where they don't feel alone. A place where they can start over, knowing they have a community behind them." He took a deep breath, feeling a lump in his throat. I never thought I'd be the one to create something like this. I always thought I was the one who needed help. But now I understand what it means to truly help someone. It's not just about giving them things. It's about giving them hope. And that's what we've done. Maria squeezed his hand. You've done more than that. You've given them the chance to rebuild their lives. You've shown them that no matter where they come from or how hard things have been, they can start fresh. You've given them a second chance. The weeks that followed brought even more successes. The program continued to expand, with new families arriving every week. More volunteers and mentors joined the team, eager to help in any way they could. The need for the program was greater than Alejandro had ever imagined, and with each new family they helped, he realized just how much work still needed to be done. But the progress was undeniable. As Alejandro walked through the new facility, he saw firsthand how the families were thriving. Parents were securing jobs, children were enrolling in school, and couples were attending counseling sessions. The once fractured lives of many had begun to heal, and hope was blooming in places that had once seemed hopeless. One of the most profound changes was in the lives of the children. Alejandro had always believed that helping a family meant helping the next generation, and seeing the children thrive was the most rewarding part of the work. One particular family stood out to him. The Hernandez family had come to the program a few months ago, struggling to make ends meet after losing their home. The parents, Isabella and Luis, were hardworking but had fallen behind on bills after Luis lost his job. Their two children, Sofia and Mateo, were withdrawn when they first arrived, too young to understand the complexities of their parents' struggles, but old enough to feel the tension and uncertainty. Now, as Alejandro watched Sofia and Mateo play with other children, laughing and running around the playground, he knew the Hernandez family had found their footing. Isabella and Luis were working with case managers, attending parenting workshops, and learning new skills to improve their job prospects. They had found stability, and their children were finally able to be children again. Alejandro watched as Isabella approached him, a grateful smile on her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know where we would be without this program. You've given us more than just shelter. You've given us hope." Alejandro smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "You did the hard work. You showed up every day for your family. You deserve this chance to rebuild." Isabella nodded, her eyes glistening. "I never thought we'd be here. I thought we'd be stuck forever. But now I believe that we can make it." As Alejandro continued his walk through the facility, he was filled with a sense of peace. He knew there would always be challenges ahead. The program would continue to grow, and with that growth would come new obstacles. But in that moment, he realized that he had found something greater than success. He had found the true meaning of family, united by love, hope, and the belief that no one is beyond saving. The phone rang in Alejandro's office early one morning. It was Maria, calling from the news site. "Hey, we just got word that the mayor wants to meet with us today. He's impressed with the work we've been doing and wants to discuss how we can partner with the city to expand even further. He also wants to highlight our work in an upcoming press conference," Maria said, her voice full of excitement. Alejandro rubbed his eyes, still groggy from an early morning meeting. "That's amazing. But do you think we're ready for all that? We're still expanding. There's so much to do, and I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves." Maria laughed softly. "Alejandro, this is just the beginning. We've already accomplished so much. The mayor's meeting is just another step forward." He sat up straighter, feeling a surge of energy. Maria was right. It was just the beginning. The program had grown so much, and yet there was still so much potential. As he looked at the pictures of the families they had helped, the progress they had made, he knew they were only scratching the surface. "I'll be there," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do it." As the mayor's meeting approached, Alejandro reflected on everything that had led him here. He had come a long way since his days of struggling with his own family's challenges. But the road he had traveled was nothing compared to the journey that lay ahead. And as he sat with Maria in the meeting room, preparing for the mayor's visit, Alejandro smiled. No matter where this journey took them, he knew one thing for sure. They had already changed lives, and they would continue to do so. The day of the mayor's meeting arrived, and Alejandro couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was a pivotal moment for the outreach program. If they could secure the support of the mayor, it would not only provide the program with more resources, but also help solidify the work they had been doing in the community. It was an opportunity for the program to receive the recognition it deserved, and Alejandro knew it could lead to even greater things. The mayor's office was located in the heart of the city, and as Alejandro and Maria entered the building, they were immediately escorted to a large conference room. The walls were adorned with portraits of past mayors and historical landmarks of the city, but Alejandro's attention was on the task at hand. He wasn't there to admire the decor. He was there to make sure that the program's message was heard loud and clear. As they sat down at the table, the mayor, a middle-aged man named Gregory Powell, walked in. He had a warm smile but an air of authority that made it clear he was used to making important decisions. "Mr. Martinez, Ms. Rivera, it's a pleasure to meet with you today," Mayor Powell said, extending his hand. "I've been following the progress of your program, and I must say, I'm impressed with the impact you've had on the community. What you're doing is incredible." Alejandro stood up, shaking the mayor's hand. "Thank you, Mayor Powell. We've worked hard to get this far, but we couldn't have done it without the support of the community." The mayor nodded, taking a seat. "I know that, and that's why I wanted to meet with you today. I see the work you're doing as something that can transform this city. We've seen an increase in homelessness and families in crisis, and I believe your program is a model for how we can address these issues on a larger scale." Maria leaned forward, eager to share their vision. "That's exactly why we're here. The program has been growing rapidly, and we're seeing tremendous results. Families are getting back on their feet, kids are going to school, and parents are finding stable employment. But to continue this progress, we need more resources, more support." Mayor Powell sat back in his chair, clearly considering their words. "I agree, and that's why I'm committed to working with you. I want to see your program expand to more neighborhoods, provide more housing options, and offer more services to those in need. But this isn't just about funding, it's about partnerships. We need to get other organizations and local businesses on board to make this a citywide initiative." Alejandro felt a surge of hope. This was the moment they had been working toward, the chance to bring the program to even more families. "We're ready for that," he said. "We've already started building relationships with local nonprofits and businesses, but we need the city's support to make it happen." The mayor smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. "I'll make sure we provide you with the necessary resources. We'll work together to ensure that every family who needs help gets it. We'll also make sure that your team is equipped to handle the increase in demand. It's time to make this program a cornerstone of our city's efforts to address homelessness and poverty." Alejandro could hardly believe what he was hearing. This wasn't just a partnership. This was a commitment to changing lives on a much larger scale. "Thank you, Mayor Powell," Maria said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This will make all the difference." As they left the mayor's office, Alejandro felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The meeting had gone even better than he had hoped. With the support of the city behind them, they were now in a position to take the program to new heights. But even as they celebrated this victory, Alejandro knew the work was far from over. Later that evening, Alejandro stood in front of the new center, looking out at the families who had come to rely on the program. He felt a deep sense of pride, but also a sense of responsibility. The opportunity before them was huge, and it would require every ounce of energy, creativity, and passion he had. But he was ready for it. "Let's do this," he whispered to himself. Over the next several months, the program grew exponentially. The city allocated funding for additional resources, including housing units, job training programs, and mental health services. Local businesses stepped up, offering employment opportunities for program participants. The outreach program became a beacon of hope for families who had once felt forgotten by the system. Families who had once been homeless were now thriving in stable housing. Children were excelling in school, and parents were rebuilding their lives with dignity and support. The city was transforming, and the outreach program was at the heart of it all. Alejandro's role also evolved. He became a sought-after speaker, sharing his story and the success of the program at conferences and community events. But despite all the recognition, Alejandro never lost sight of the program's mission: to help people rebuild their lives and give them the tools to succeed. Maria, Linda, Matt, and the rest of the team continued to work tirelessly, each person contributing to the program's success in their own way. As the months passed, Alejandro felt a sense of fulfillment he had never imagined possible. He had found his true calling, not just helping families, but also creating a community of support that could change the world, one person at a time. One evening, as Alejandro sat in his office, reflecting on everything they had accomplished, his phone rang. It was a call from Isabella Hernandez, the mother of one of the families that had been part of the program since the very beginning. "Hello, Mr. Martinez?" Isabella's voice came through the phone, warm and grateful. "I just wanted to call and thank you again. We're finally in our own house and Luis got a full-time job. The kids are doing so well in school, and we're all finally starting to feel like a family again. I don't know how to thank you." Alejandro smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You don't have to thank me, Isabella. You and Luis did the hard work. You made this happen." She laughed softly. "I know, but it wouldn't have been possible without you. You gave us a chance when no one else would. I just wanted you to know that you've changed our lives." As they said their goodbyes, Alejandro hung up the phone, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The program was no longer just about him or the team. It was about the families who had been given a second chance, just like Isabella's. And that, Alejandro realized, was the true legacy of the work they had done. What's your legacy going to be? What kind of impact do you want to leave on the world? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most incredible changes. Together, we can create a future where everyone has the chance to succeed.